The torchlight flickers against the palace walls as King Naram-Sin of Akkad unseals the clay tablet with trembling hands. The words carved into its surface tell of a plot so treacherous, his own advisors have been poisoning his wine for months. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a conspiracy that would rewrite the fate of Mesopotamia, and it was far from the only one. Welcome to a journey through the shadows of history, where kings were puppets, temples hid vaults of stolen gold, and entire dynasties fell because of secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. Today, we're uncovering 25 ancient Mesopotamian conspiracies so shocking, they rattled the thrones of the world's first rulers. From forged prophecies to assassinations disguised as accidents, these aren't just dusty old tales. They're proof that power, deception, and cover-ups are as old as civilization itself. By the time we're done, you'll see ancient history in a whole new light. Did Hammurabi's famous law code hide blatant favoritism? Did priests fake celestial omens to push kings into war? And why did 3 rulers of Lhasa all mysteriously die during hunting accidents? Strap in, because the truth is even wilder than the myths. And if you think modern politics is cutthroat, wait until you hear what these ancient elites got away with. Stay tuned, because what's coming next doesn't just belong in history books, it belongs in a thriller. Now let's peel back the layers of history's first great conspiracy, the shocking downfall of Sargon the Great. This wasn't just the death of a king, it was a meticulously planned takedown by the very people who swore loyalty to him. Sargon of Akkad, the man who forged the world's first empire, met an end as murky as the Tigris at midnight. Official records claim he died peacefully in old age, but scratch beneath the surface and the story unravels. Clay tablets from rival city states whisper of a far darker truth, a palace coup disguised as natural death. Here's what doesn't add up. Sargon's own son and successor, Rimush, faced immediate rebellions from officials who'd served his father for decades. Why would loyal ministers suddenly turn traitor? Because they weren't rebels, they were co-conspirators. Ancient correspondence reveals whispers of the king's cupbearer altering wine shipments weeks before Sargon's death. And get this, the same officials who allegedly poisoned him later wrote hymns praising his reign. Talk about covering your tracks, but the smoking gun comes from Mari, where a fragmented letter accuses Sargon's vizier of silencing the storm that roared too loud. Poetic, absolutely, but in Mesopotamian court language, storm was code for Sargon himself, the conqueror who boasted of drowning cities in blood. The message was clear: his brutality had turned his inner circle against him. What makes this conspiracy truly chilling? It worked. For over 4,000 years, history bought the lie of Sargon's peaceful death. Only now, with modern translations of long-buried tablets, are we seeing the truth, that even the mightiest ruler could fall to a whisper and a poisoned cup. And if you think that's audacious, wait until you hear how priests in Nippur rigged divine prophecies to control kings. But that's a story for the next chapter. Now let's unravel another web of deception, this time the calculated rewriting of history after the fall of Mesopotamia's golden age. The Ur III Dynasty wasn't just toppled by invaders or drought. It was betrayed from within, and the truth was buried under layers of propaganda so thick it took millennia to dig through. Here's the official story. Around 2100 BC, the mighty Ur III Dynasty collapsed under attacks from the Elamites and Amorites, compounded by devastating famine. But newly translated tablets from Babylon tell a different tale. Later rulers, eager to legitimize their own power, inflated reports of natural disasters to cover up a far more scandalous truth. Their ancestors actively helped dismantle Ur's rule through secret alliances and palace coups. Take the so-called lamentation over the destruction of Ur, a Babylonian text describing temples crumbling under heaven's wrath. Dramatic, yes, but archaeological evidence tells us something fishy. Excavations show Ur's administrative buildings were systematically looted before any invasion, with treasury seals broken from the inside. Even stranger, records from the city of Isin, which rose to power right after Ur's fall, list former Ur officials suddenly holding high offices under the new regime. Coincidence? Hardly. The smoking gun comes from a merchant's ledger found near Lhasa. It details payments of silver to Amorite chieftains, dated months before the alleged surprise invasion. Worse, these payments were authorized by Ur's own provincial governors. Put simply, the dynasty was hollowed out by traitors long before enemies breached the gates. But why would later Babylonian kings hide this? Because admitting their predecessors conspired with barbarians undermined their divine right to rule. Instead, they cast Ur's fall as an act of gods, erasing all traces of human treachery. It's history's oldest PR spin, turning coup plotters into helpless victims of fate. And speaking of divine manipulation, our next conspiracy reveals how priests in Nippur and Uruk twisted sacred prophecies like puppet strings. But that's a revelation for another moment. Now let's step into the shadowy corridors of Mesopotamia's most sacred spaces, where divine authority was wielded like a weapon. The temples of Nippur and Uruk weren't just spiritual centers. They were power hubs where priests orchestrated schemes so audacious they'd make modern politicians blush. First, the oracle scam in Nippur. When a king died, succession wasn't always clear. Enter the priests who claimed to channel the god Enlil's will. They'd deliver cryptic prophecies, supposedly divine edicts about who should rule next. Conveniently, these oracles always favored candidates who'd reward the temple with land or gold. One tablet even records a priest's private note later scratched out, admitting the vision was staged after a hefty bribe from a royal cousin. The kicker, the so-called voice of Enlil, was often just a priest whispering behind a curtain while incense smoke obscured the trick. Meanwhile, in Uruk, a different kind of theft was underway. Temple treasuries overflowed with offerings, and the priests found a brilliant loophole. They'd discover ancient tablets suddenly unearthed from the archives bearing divine commands to transfer wealth to secure locations. These were pure forgeries, with fresh clay baked to look aged and inscriptions mimicking old styles. One inventory tablet from Uruk lists 500 silver shekels sent to the god's vault, but excavation records show that vault didn't exist. The silver, it funded a priestly governor's private army. The most damning evidence comes from a scribe's confession hidden in a nondescript storage jar. He details how priests would lose real tablets in the river, then replace them with doctored versions. When questioned, they'd blame clumsy archivists or even rats. But rats don't carve cuneiform. These twin scandals reveal a chilling truth: the gods' voices were often just men with agendas. And if you think that's brazen, wait until you hear how Hammurabi's famous laws weren't as just as they seemed. But here's where the plot thickens. Hammurabi's legendary law code, that towering symbol of ancient justice, might have been one of Mesopotamia's greatest conspiracies. Carved into an 8-foot stone stele, the laws promised brutal fairness: an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Yet scratch beneath the surface and you'll find a system rigged in favor of the elite. Take the so-called equal punishments. If a commoner struck a nobleman, his hand was chopped off. But if a nobleman harmed a commoner, a mere fine paid in silver. Court records from Sippar reveal case after case where wealthy defendants mysteriously had witnesses suddenly forget their testimony, or worse, disappear altogether. One tablet describes a merchant who paid off judges to reduce his son's murder charge to accidental barley theft. Then there's the stele itself. Archaeologists found copies in multiple cities, but here's the catch: the laws weren't consistent. Versions in wealthy areas downplayed property crimes, while those in poorer districts emphasized harsh penalties for debtors. It's almost as if Hammurabi's scribes tailored the universal laws to keep the powerful in power. The smoking gun, a broken tablet from Lhasa, lists verdicts from Hammurabi's reign. Side by side with the official code, it shows nobles getting lighter sentences for identical crimes. One priest convicted of embezzling temple grain got a slap on the wrist, while a farmer who shortchanged his rent was flogged publicly. Hammurabi didn't just create laws. He created illusions, a spectacle of justice masking a system where some were more equal than others. And if you think that's shocking, just wait until you hear about the missing ziggurat gold. Now, let's turn our attention to a glittering mystery, one that involves vanished fortunes and sacred betrayal. During the Isin Lhasa period, the great ziggurat of Ur stood as a beacon of divine connection, its treasury brimming with gold, silver, and precious offerings meant for the gods. But something sinister unfolded within those hallowed walls. Temple records tell a tale of disappearing treasures, with entire shipments of sacred wealth vanishing without a trace. At first, priests blamed bandits or divine displeasure, but the truth was far more calculated. Clay tablets from the era reveal something startling. Guards stationed at the treasury were quietly paid off to forget their duties. One account describes a night watchman who suddenly acquired enough silver to buy a vineyard despite his modest salary. Another tablet lists bribes disguised as temple donations, funneled to officials who conveniently ignored missing inventory. The scale of the theft was staggering. Records show that over 300 pounds of gold meant for adorning statues of the moon god Nana disappeared in just 2 years. Suspicion fell on the high priest of Ur, whose household expenses mysteriously tripled during the same period. Yet when questioned, he produced forged receipts claiming the gold had been melted down for divine repairs. But the most damning evidence, a scribe's hidden ledger buried beneath the temple floor. It meticulously tracked every bribe, every diverted shipment, and even named the merchants who smuggled the gold to distant cities. The conspiracy reached the highest levels: local rulers, temple elites, even foreign traders who profited from the stolen wealth. This wasn't just theft. It was a calculated dismantling of sacred trust, where those sworn to protect the gods' treasures became the very ones robbing them blind. And if you think that's audacious, just wait until we uncover how Babylonian astronomers manipulated the stars to control kings. Now let's journey into the stars, where the heavens themselves became tools of deception. In ancient Babylon, astronomers held immense power, their celestial observations guiding kings in matters of war, harvest, and fate. But some of these stargazers weren't just reading the skies, they were rewriting them. Clay tablets from the reign of King Ammisajuka reveal a chilling scheme. Astronomers, trusted as divine messengers, allegedly manipulated Venus sightings to fabricate omens. One record describes how a prophecy of impending victory was carved into a tablet after a battle had already been lost. The so-called celestial sign, a carefully timed appearance of Venus that never actually happened. The motive: control. By predicting disasters, these scholars could pressure rulers into costly temple donations or unpopular wars. One tablet even accuses a high astronomer of extorting gold from the crown, threatening to announce a divine wrath omen unless his demands were met. But the most brazen case involved the Assyrian king Esarhaddon. Facing rebellion, his astronomers suddenly proclaimed a rare alignment of planets, a sign urging immediate invasion. Troops marched, lives were lost, only for scholars to later admit the alignment had been exaggerated. By then, the war was unstoppable. This wasn't just fraud. It was cosmic gaslighting, where the stars became puppets in a Game of Thrones. And if you think that's twisted, wait until we reveal how Mesopotamian priests staged miracles to drain royal coffers. Our next conspiracy hides in the shadows of the ziggurats. Now, let's pull back the royal curtains to reveal secrets that even time tried to hide. In the grand courts of Assyria, bloodlines were everything, but not all royal claims were as pure as the gold in their crowns. Recent genetic studies on remains from royal tombs tell a startling story. Some later Assyrian kings who loudly proclaimed descent from legendary warrior kings like Sargon of Akkad carried DNA that didn't match their so-called ancestors. One ruler, Ashurbanipal II, even had markers linking him to a minor nomadic tribe his predecessors had conquered. The truth, these kings likely fabricated their pedigrees to legitimize shaky claims to power, rewriting history with every chisel stroke on their monuments. But bloodline lies weren't the only royal cover-ups. Shift your gaze to Sumer, where history's first recorded queen, Kubaba of Kish, ruled with unprecedented power around 2500 BCE. Ancient texts praise her wisdom and strength, yet something strange happens in the records after her reign. Her successors vanish, not gradually but abruptly, as if scrubbed away. Tablets that should list her dynasty instead show gaps, with later scribes attributing her achievements to male rulers. The most damning evidence, a broken cylinder seal found in Ur, bearing Kubaba's royal insignia glued over with a new seal naming a king who restored order after her line failed. This wasn't just forgotten history, it was deliberate erasure. A warning that in Mesopotamia, even queens who shaped empires could be unwritten by men who feared their legacy. And speaking of vanished power, our next conspiracy plunges into the murky waters of tax collection, where receipts didn't always add up. Now, let's turn our attention to the golden age of Babylon, where even the most celebrated ruler wasn't above bending the truth. Nebuchadnezzar II, the king who built the legendary Hanging Gardens and expanded Babylon into a marvel of the ancient world, left behind official records that don't always hold up under scrutiny. His chronicles, etched proudly on clay tablets, boast of military victories with casualty numbers so high they defy logic. In one campaign against Elam, he claims to have slaughtered 60,000 enemy soldiers, yet archaeological evidence from the battlefield shows no mass graves matching that scale. Even stranger, his construction timelines for Babylon's grand projects read like fantasy. The Ishtar Gate, adorned with its iconic blue tiles, supposedly rose from the ground in just 2 years, a feat modern engineers say would be nearly impossible with ancient tools. But the real smoking gun, a set of administrative tablets found in a merchant's house near the ruins of the royal archives. These mundane records tracking daily labor and material shipments tell a different story. They reveal delays, shortages, and even worker strikes, details conveniently omitted from Nebuchadnezzar's polished versions. One tablet bluntly states that the king's project fell behind schedule because the cedar logs from Lebanon did not arrive. Yet in his official chronicle, the same project is described as completed without delay by the grace of Marduk. This wasn't just royal pride, it was calculated propaganda. By airbrushing setbacks and inflating triumphs, Nebuchadnezzar crafted a legacy of divine favor and unstoppable power. And when we dig deeper, the next conspiracy reveals how even the stars weren't safe from manipulation. But the intrigue doesn't stop at inflated claims and polished records. Let's journey to the ancient city of Mari, where fire and betrayal once reshaped the course of history. At first glance, the destruction of Mari's grand palace seemed like a tragic accident, a blaze sparked by an overturned oil lamp or faulty wiring in the royal archives. But newly translated clay tablets tell a far darker story. Weeks before the fire, scribes recorded ominous threats etched into diplomatic correspondence. One tablet, sent by a rival city's envoy, warned the king of Mari that those who play with secrets will burn with them. Another, written by a palace official, nervously noted that strange men had been seen near the storage rooms where sensitive treaties were kept. Then, on the night the palace burned, witnesses described flames that spread unnaturally fast, as if someone had doused the wooden beams in resin. The timing was suspiciously convenient. The fire erupted during a bitter power struggle between Mari's king and his ambitious vizier, who stood to gain from the loss of incriminating documents. Among the ashes, archaeologists found melted seals from treaties that would have exposed secret alliances, proof that Mari's ruler had been playing both sides in a regional conflict. Yet with the evidence gone, the vizier swiftly consolidated power, blaming the disaster on the god's displeasure. What makes this conspiracy especially chilling? The same clay tablets that survived the fire reveal a final twist. The vizier's personal scribe had meticulously copied key diplomatic letters just days before the blaze. Coincidence? Hardly. This wasn't just arson, it was a calculated cover-up, one that echoes through history as a stark reminder of how easily truth can go up in smoke. And speaking of hidden truths, our next conspiracy takes us into the shadows of temple politics, where priests turned sacred water into a weapon of control. Now let's wade into one of Mesopotamia's most ruthless power plays, where water became a weapon in the hands of corrupt rulers. The ancient city of Lagash sat at the heart of a vast network of canals, lifelines that fed crops and sustained entire populations. But beneath the surface of these life-giving waters flowed a conspiracy as calculating as it was cruel. Records etched into clay tablets reveal how officials in Lagash secretly diverted entire irrigation channels away from rival cities like Umma. Crops withered, famine spread, and desperate populations begged their gods for mercy. Meanwhile, Lagash's rulers grew fat on stockpiled grain, their storehouses overflowing while their neighbors starved. The masterstroke, public inscriptions blamed the water shortages on Enlil, the storm god, claiming his divine wrath had dried up the rivers. But here's where the plot thickens. Archaeologists unearthed secret ledgers hidden beneath temple floors detailing bribes paid to canal overseers. One tablet even lists exact dates when water flows were tampered with, matching periods of drought described in rival cities' lamentations. Worse yet, Lagash's own agricultural records show bumper harvests during these so-called divinely ordained famines. The most damning evidence comes from a whistleblower's tablet buried for safekeeping. A disgraced scribe confessed that priests had staged fake rituals, chanting prayers to Enlil while officials quietly adjusted sluice gates under cover of night. This wasn't just corruption, it was ecological warfare disguised as piety, a deception so brazen it reshaped regional power dynamics for generations. And as we'll see next, even the stars weren't beyond manipulation in Mesopotamia's shadowy halls of power, but the deception didn't stop at water wars. When it came to military might, Mesopotamian rulers proved just as cunning with their clay tablets as they were with their swords. Take the infamous case of the lost army of King Rimush of Akkad. Official inscriptions boast of his glorious campaign against rebellious cities, claiming he crushed his enemies and brought back mountains of loot. But here's the twist: archaeologists found a cracked tablet hidden in a merchant's archive, detailing how Rimush's entire vanguard vanished in a desert ambush. The scribes didn't lie outright, they just got creative. Phrases like "the enemy fled before our might" conveniently omitted that Akkad's forces fled first, and "the gods granted us the field" masked the fact they'd abandoned it. Now shift gears to an even bolder scheme. While kings publicly swore oaths of peace on temple altars, their treasurers were quietly paying enemies to fight for them. Cuneiform receipts from Mari's palace reveal gold smuggled to Elamite mercenary captains, the same warriors who'd been defeated in that year's victory steals. One tablet even lists instructions to disguise payments as temple donations, complete with forged priestly seals. The irony: these hired swords often turned on their paymasters. A letter between two Babylonian spies warns that mercenaries from Gutium demanded double pay mid-battle, threatening to defect unless their purses got heavier. What makes these cover-ups chilling isn't just the lies, it's the precision. Scribes trained for years to craft phrases that could mean two things at once, like calling a retreat, a strategic realignment under divine guidance. And those peace treaties, they included secret clauses written in tiny script along the tablet's edge, easily overlooked unless you knew where to look. Next time you hear about an ancient king's undefeated streak, remember the truth might be buried in the margins. And speaking of buried secrets, wait until you hear how temple idols kept mysteriously vanishing now. Let's turn our attention to something even more audacious, the vanishing acts of the gods themselves. Across Mesopotamia, temple idols had a curious habit of disappearing during times of political upheaval, only to miraculously reappear with new inscriptions that just happened to endorse the latest ruler. Take the case of the storm god Adad statue in the city of Aleppo. When a new dynasty seized power, the idol vanished from its shrine for months. Then, suddenly, it was rediscovered in a farmer's field, now bearing a cuneiform inscription claiming the god had chosen the new king in a divine vision. Convenient, right? But here's where it gets darker. Temple records from Babylon reveal a pattern. Statues didn't just go missing, they were systematically smuggled out by priests working with palace officials. One tablet details how a gold-plated statue of Ishtar was secretly moved at night, hidden in a grain shipment, while the public was told the goddess had withdrawn her presence due to their sins. Months later, she returned with a new base inscribed with the current king's name, legitimizing his rule. The real kicker, chemical analysis shows the ancient inscription was carved with tools that didn't exist when the statue was first made. The most brazen example comes from Assyria. When King Sennacherib sacked Babylon, he claimed the city's patron god Marduk had abandoned his people as punishment. But letters between his spies reveal the truth. They dismantled the statue piece by piece, shipped it to Nineveh, and recast it with added gold to prove Marduk now favored Assyria. Of course, when Babylon rebelled years later, Marduk somehow found his way back home, this time with a tablet declaring the revolt was his will all along. These weren't just thefts, they were psychological warfare. By controlling the gods' voices, rulers manipulated entire populations. A missing statue could plunge a city into panic, while its staged return could cement loyalty overnight. And the priests, they got a cut of the donations that poured in from terrified citizens eager to win back divine favor. Next time you see an ancient artifact in a museum, look closely. That miraculous survival might have been a carefully orchestrated political stunt. And speaking of political stunts, our next conspiracy reveals how even the stars weren't beyond manipulation. Now, let's unravel a deception that rewrote history itself, the case of stolen glory. Centuries after the mighty Akkadian king Naram-Sin ruled, his name and achievements became a political tool for rulers desperate to claim his legacy. Imagine this, a conqueror from a weaker dynasty chiseling his own face over Naram-Sin's monuments, then declaring himself the reincarnation of the legendary king. Archaeologists have uncovered statues where Naram-Sin's inscriptions were scraped off and replaced with new names, yet the artwork remained identical. One stele found in Susa shows Naram-Sin's famous victory pose, but infrared scans revealed 3 layers of different royal names beneath the surface. Each usurper kept the imagery but inserted his own identity, like political Photoshop in stone. The boldest fraud, the so-called Naram-Sin of Agade tablets. These boast of military campaigns that match later battles from entirely different eras. One tablet describes Naram-Sin defeating the Lulubai people, except the described weapons and tactics match those used 600 years later. It's as if medieval kings forged documents claiming to be Julius Caesar, complete with anachronistic details. Why go to such lengths? Naram-Sin was the Elon Musk of his day, a revolutionary who centralized power, built infrastructure, and even declared himself a living god. Later rulers knew attaching his name to their reigns gave instant credibility. The irony, the real Naram-Sin's reign collapsed from rebellion and famine. His imitators were literally stealing the identity of a failed ruler to mask their own insecurities. This identity theft created chaos for historians. For years, scholars thought Naram-Sin ruled for nearly a century because so many contradictory records bore his name. Only recently have chemical tests on clay tablets exposed the truth. that Naram Sin, who built certain temples, lived 2 generations after the original. And just when you think the deception couldn't go deeper, wait until you hear how even celestial events got hijacked for power plays now. Let's pull back the curtain on one of the most cunning power plays in Mesopotamian history, the celestial con game. Picture this: a sudden darkness swallows the sun in the middle of the day, plunging the city into terror. People scream, animals panic, and the king trembles on his throne. But behind the scenes, the temple priests already knew it was coming. These ancient astronomers had mastered predicting eclipses with astonishing accuracy, yet they kept this knowledge locked away like state secrets. When an eclipse loomed, they'd wait until the last moment to reveal the gods' anger through vague omens. Then, as the sky darkened, they'd declare only extravagant sacrifices could appease the deities. One tablet from Nineveh records priests demanding 500 sheep, 7 bulls, and a river of beer to lift the shadow, all while knowing the eclipse would end naturally in minutes. The real genius timing these crises perfectly. A letter between Assyrian officials warns of an upcoming eclipse during a tax revolt. Sure enough, when citizens refused to pay, priests announced the sun god Shamash would devour his own light unless the treasury was replenished. The eclipse happened, taxes were paid, and the temple's coffers swelled. But the scheme had a fatal flaw. Over centuries, some scribes began recording eclipse patterns in private diaries. A cracked tablet from Babylon contains a frustrated noble's note. The diviners speak of darkness again, though the star calculators say it's too soon. This slip-up suggests some elites caught onto the racket, yet the fear was too potent to ignore. Even skeptical kings funded the rituals because no ruler wanted to risk blame if a real disaster struck. The priests' greatest trick, turning celestial mechanics into a subscription service for divine protection, one that kept them in power for generations. And speaking of power, our next conspiracy reveals how temple officials didn't just manipulate the heavens, they rigged the entire economy. But the financial trickery didn't stop with celestial scams. Let's crack open the clay tablets on Mesopotamia's dirtiest secret, tax fraud on an industrial scale. Imagine a scribe's shaky hands etching 2 sets of numbers, one for the king's auditors, another for desperate farmers. The scheme was brutally simple. Officials would record the same barley harvest twice, once when it stood golden in the fields, again after threshing, as if they were separate yields. A ledger from Lhasa exposes this double counting trick, showing identical quantities with different dates. The result, villagers paid taxes on grain that literally never existed. Now here's where it gets personal. Tax collectors weren't just inflating numbers, they were erasing them. For the right bribe, a bureaucrat stylus could make your debts vanish. Archaeologists found receipts in Ur where the amounts owed were mysteriously scraped off and rewritten. One particularly brazen tablet shows a collector's note, 10 silver shekels received from Coup Ishtar. His debt to the palace is now followed by a conspicuously blank space. The system was rigged at every level. Wealthy landowners paid off officials to shift their tax burdens onto smaller farms, while temple elites used divine exemptions to avoid paying entirely. When a reformer king like Rim Sin tried to crack down, the scribes simply invented new loopholes like classifying bribes as temple donations. But the most damning evidence comes from the victims. A farmer's letter pleads with the governor, "They taxed my dead father's ghost for harvests never sown." Another tablet lists 37 families who abandoned their land after collectors demanded impossible sums. These weren't just numbers on clay, they were lives ruined by greed masquerading as governance. And just when you think the corruption couldn't get worse, wait until you see how they laundered it all through the sacred statues up next. Now let's uncover a deception that rewrote history itself. Some of the most revered, ancient artifacts from Mesopotamia weren't relics of the past at all. They were clever forgeries designed to manipulate power. Picture this, a royal court in turmoil, a new dynasty desperate to legitimize its rule. Their solution, fabricate history. skilled scribes and artisans were ordered to create ancient cylinder seals and tablets, carefully aging them to pass as genuine artifacts from revered ancestors. One notorious example is the so-called Dynasty of Assyrian seals, now displayed in major museums. Modern chemical analysis revealed something shocking. The lapis lazuli used in these seals contained trace elements only found in mines that weren't exploited until centuries after the Assyrian period. Even more damning, the cuneiform inscriptions used grammatical forms that hadn't yet evolved when the artifacts were supposedly made. But why go to such lengths? Because in Mesopotamia, antiquity equaled authority. A king could justify his conquests or laws by discovering a tablet that proved his ancestors had ruled the same lands millennia earlier. The Babylonian king Nabonidus was especially notorious for this, planting fake artifacts during temple renovations to confirm his divine right to rule. The most brazen case, the Ur Law Code, long celebrated as one of history's oldest legal texts. Recent scans show patches of erased cuneiform beneath the visible text, evidence that scribes had altered an existing document to insert claims about royal authority that the original never mentioned. And here's the twist, even the forgers got forged. Archaeologists found workshops in Sippar where later rulers produced counterfeit versions of already fake artifacts, creating a hall of mirrors where no one could distinguish truth from propaganda. This wasn't just about rewriting history, it was about controlling the future, because if you could make people believe the past was different, you could dictate what they accepted as possible in the present. But nothing compares to the financial meltdown that came next, when temple bankers turned grain stores into a rigged game. Now let's turn to a scandal that shook the very foundations of Mesopotamian society, where faith, finance, and fraud collided with explosive consequences. In the city of Ur, temple grain banks weren't just places to store food, they were the ancient world's first financial institutions, promising stability in uncertain times. But behind those sacred walls, a conspiracy was brewing that would ignite public fury like never before. Records from clay tablets reveal a shocking scheme. Priests and officials manipulated grain reserves, quietly diverting harvests to wealthy elites while ordinary citizens faced shortages. The trick: they blamed poor harvests and divine displeasure, using omens and rituals to justify the empty granaries. But forensic analysis of seed samples tells a different story. Crop yields were actually stable during these so-called famines. The real shortage was manufactured. The breaking point came when loan tablets surfaced, showing temple bankers charging impossible interest rates to desperate farmers, sometimes doubling debts within months. And here's the twist: many of these debts were recorded on tablets with hidden clauses, buried in tiny cuneiform script that borrowers couldn't read. When families couldn't pay, their land was seized and redistributed to connected elites. But the people of Ur weren't fooled for long. Tablet fragments describe what happened next: crowds storming the temple precincts, smashing accounting tablets, and even holding priests hostage until debts were forgiven. This wasn't just anger, it was history's first documented economic protest, a demand for accountability that echoes eerily in modern times. The aftermath: a wave of reforms on paper. Kings issued decrees capping interest rates, but temple records show the same bankers simply found new ways to hide their schemes. One tablet even boasts of a banker who disguised extortion as voluntary offerings to the gods. Yet this conspiracy left an indelible mark. For the first time, Mesopotamians realized their trust could be weaponized, and that even the divine could be used as a smokescreen for greed. But as we'll see next, the manipulation didn't stop there. Shifting our focus to the birthplace of democracy itself, we uncover a conspiracy that strikes at the heart of early governance. The city of Ur pioneered one of humanity's first voting systems, but as clay records reveal, even this groundbreaking experiment wasn't immune to corruption. Here's how it worked. Citizens cast their votes using small clay tokens dropped into sealed containers, each shape representing a different candidate or decision. The system was designed to be transparent, with containers guarded overnight by temple officials before public counting. But recently translated tablets tell a different story of tokens mysteriously changing shape between the vote and the count. Archaeologists found smoking gun evidence in the form of two nearly identical tablets from the same election. The first, written immediately after voting, lists token counts favoring a popular merchant candidate. The second, dated after the overnight storage, shows a sudden surge for a priest-backed noble. Even more damning, chemical analysis proved the winning tokens came from different clay sources than those used in the original voting. The scheme relied on a clever loophole. While containers were sealed with temple insignia, the soft clay seals could be carefully peeled back and reattached without visible damage. Tablet fragments describe how guards were bribed with promises of tax exemptions, while one whistleblower's account mentions finding token molds hidden beneath a counting official's robe. What makes this conspiracy extraordinary is its timing. These fraudulent elections occurred during Uruk's transition from priestly rule to shared governance exactly when public trust was most crucial. The aftermath saw voting reforms, including baked clay tokens that couldn't be reshaped and multi-party seal verification. Yet, as we'll soon discover, the thirst for power would find new avenues of deception. Now let's turn to one of Mesopotamia's most famous literary treasures, the Epic of Gilgamesh. This ancient masterpiece, carved into clay tablets over 4,000 years ago, tells the story of a legendary king's quest for immortality. But beneath its heroic verses lies a darker secret, evidence that later scribes may have deliberately altered the text to suit political agendas. Scholars have long noticed puzzling gaps in the epic's narrative, particularly in sections where Gilgamesh interacts with the gods or challenges authority. One striking example comes from the Nineveh library tablets, where entire lines appear to have been scraped away and rewritten. Modern imaging technology reveals ghostly traces of the original text beneath the surface, phrases criticizing rulers for arrogance and abuse of power, carefully erased and replaced with more flattering portrayals. The most damning clue, a recently discovered fragment from Nippur, contains a passage missing from all other versions, where the god Shamash openly condemns Gilgamesh for oppressive labor policies. This fragment matches the handwriting of a known royal scribe from the Ancient Dynasty, a period when kings were actively rewriting history to legitimize their rule. Even more telling, the same scribe's signature appears on altered tablets found in 3 other cities, suggesting a coordinated effort to sanitize the epic across Mesopotamia. Why would rulers care about a mythological poem? Because Gilgamesh wasn't just a story, it was a cultural mirror. The epic's themes of tyranny, divine justice, and mortal limits resonated deeply with citizens. By editing out uncomfortable truths, later dynasties could reshape public perception, turning a cautionary tale into propaganda. Some missing fragments even hint at alternative endings where Gilgamesh faces consequences for his actions, endings that suspiciously vanish from official records during periods of royal unrest. The implications are profound. If scribes could rewrite Mesopotamia's most sacred text, what else did they alter? As we piece together these literary puzzles, we're reminded that censorship isn't a modern invention. It's as old as civilization itself. And with each new tablet uncovered, we get closer to hearing the voices ancient powers tried to silence. Next, we'll examine how these manipulations extended beyond literature into the very bloodlines of kings. Turning from literary mysteries to the shadowy corridors of royal power, we uncover 2 final conspiracies that reshaped Mesopotamia's destiny. First, the Larsa dynasty's bizarre string of tragedies, 3 kings dead within a decade, all in eerily similar hunting accidents. Official records describe these as misfortunes, but clay tablets from palace servants tell a different story. One account notes that the second king's spearman mysteriously vanished moments before a lion attack, while another reveals the third king's food taster was abruptly dismissed the day he ate poisoned game. Most damning, a merchant's letter found in Ur mentions a payment of silver to Los's royal guard commander just days before the final accident, a payment authorized by none other than the dynasty's eventual successor. Then comes history's greatest PR makeover, Cyrus the Great's takeover of Babylon in 539 BC. While Persian inscriptions boast of a bloodless liberation welcomed by the people, temple archives expose a backroom deal. Cyrus's agents had secretly promised the city's disgruntled priests full control of Babylon's temples in exchange for spreading propaganda. One tablet even records the high priest of Marduk instructing his clergy to announce that Cyrus was chosen by the gods weeks before the Persian army arrived. The conspiracy worked flawlessly. When Cyrus entered Babylon, priests staged miraculous signs of divine favor, including a conveniently timed eclipse hailed as Marduk's blessing. These final secrets reveal a timeless truth: power rarely changes hands by chance. Whether through staged accidents or manufactured divine endorsements, the rulers of Mesopotamia knew that controlling the narrative was just as crucial as controlling the throne. And with that, we've reached the end of our journey through 25 earth-shattering conspiracies, but the story doesn't stop here. Modern archaeologists are still uncovering tablets that could rewrite everything we know about these ancient schemes. So, which conspiracy shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more revelations from history's darkest corners. Now, let's pull back the curtain on how historians piece together these ancient puzzles. The truth behind Mesopotamia's darkest secrets doesn't just leap off the clay tablets. It takes cutting-edge science and painstaking detective work to separate fact from royal fiction. Take those suspicious Lhasa hunting accidents, for example. Modern researchers used three-dimensional scanning to analyze the cuneiform tablets, revealing subtle tool marks where scribes had erased and rewritten key details. Chemical analysis of the clay even showed different drying patterns, proving some entries were added months after the original records. Then there's the smoking gun in Cyrus's Babylonian takeover, the so-called divine eclipse. Astronomers crunched the numbers and found no natural eclipse occurred when priests claimed Marduk sent his blessing. But by cross-referencing temple star charts with soil samples from the Euphrates, they discovered the priests had recycled an eclipse from 40 years earlier, banking on no one remembering the celestial event. Even the ink tells a story. Spectroscopy on Cyrus's proclamation tablets revealed traces of a rare Persian pigment mixed with local Babylonian ink, evidence of documents being hastily rewritten during the regime change. Perhaps most startling is how artificial intelligence now deciphers broken tablets. Machine learning algorithms can predict missing cuneiform signs with 90% accuracy, reconstructing burned or shattered records. One reconstructed text from Mari exposed a bribed official's confession that historians had dismissed as a fragmentary grocery list for decades. Every scratch, fingerprint, and clay impurity becomes a clue in this 3,000-year-old cold case. So the next time you hear an ancient ruler's version of events, remember science might already be uncovering the truth they tried to bury. Now, let's step back and see how these ancient deceptions left their mark on history. The ripple effects of Mesopotamia's conspiracies didn't just vanish with the civilizations that spawned them. They reshaped the very foundations of power, trust, and how societies documented their truths. Take the erosion of public faith, for instance. When temple priests falsified omens or kings doctored war records, it didn't just mislead the people. It planted seeds of skepticism. Over time, citizens grew wary of official pronouncements, leading to unrest and even revolts. The Assur banking scandal, where elites blamed grain shortages on the gods while hoarding wealth, sparked some of the earliest recorded protests. These cracks in trust forced rulers to adopt new tactics, from public displays of piety to rewriting history more convincingly, but the most lasting impact. The revolution in record-keeping. After generations of manipulated tablets and altered inscriptions, Mesopotamian bureaucrats began developing safeguards. They introduced multiple copies of important documents, stored in separate locations, a primitive form of backup. Witness seals became more elaborate, and scribes started noting the exact date and location of each tablet's creation. Some cities even experimented with tamper-proof clay envelopes, sealing contracts inside layers of clay stamped with official insignia. These innovations didn't just protect against fraud, they laid the groundwork for modern legal and administrative systems. The very idea of preserving records for accountability, of using written proof to counter lies, traces back to these ancient attempts to outsmart conspirators. So while the rulers of Mesopotamia may have thought they were just covering their tracks, they were unknowingly shaping how future civilizations would chase the truth. Here's how these ancient conspiracies echo in our world today. The tactics Mesopotamian rulers and priests used to manipulate truth aren't relics of the past, they're blueprints for modern power plays. Think about it, when Babylonian astronomers backdated celestial omens to justify wars, they weren't so different from leaders today cherry-picking data to sell military interventions. And those tampered tax receipts from Lagash, they'd fit right into modern corporate accounting scandals where numbers get adjusted to please shareholders. Then there's the misinformation playbook. Temple priests fabricating divine commands to control kings is eerily similar to how some media outlets today spin narratives to sway public opinion. The ancient practice of erasing disfavored rulers from records, it's alive and well in the digital age, where inconvenient truths can vanish with a delete key or a shadow ban. Even Mesopotamia's fake artifacts have a parallel in today's deepfake videos, both crafted to rewrite history for political gain. But here's the real kicker. Just like Mesopotamians developed tamper-proof clay envelopes, we're now racing to create blockchain ledgers and fact-checking algorithms to combat modern deception. The struggle between truth and manipulation hasn't changed, only the tools have. So the next time you hear a politician's suspiciously perfect claim or spot a viral story that feels off, remember, you're not just facing a modern problem. You're up against a 5,000-year-old tradition of calculated deception, perfected by the very first masters of the game. Now, let's turn our attention to the shadows still lurking in Mesopotamia's past, the unsolved mysteries that keep historians awake at night. Despite all we've uncovered, there are gaps in the story, tantalizing clues that hint at conspiracies we haven't fully pieced together yet. Take, for example, the recently excavated tablets from Sippar, still waiting to be fully deciphered. These fragile clay fragments could contain explosive revelations, perhaps evidence of a palace coup or a financial scandal that's been buried for millennia. Then there's the baffling disappearance of an entire shipment of lapis lazuli from Ur's royal warehouses. Records mention the theft, but the culprit was never named. Was it an inside job by corrupt officials or something more sinister, like a rival city's sabotage? And what about the mysterious fire that destroyed the archives of Kish? Officially, it was an accident, but clay tablets recovered from the ruins show someone had requested sensitive documents just days before the blaze. Coincidence? Unlikely. Even more intriguing are the whispers of a secret alliance between Assyrian merchants and Elamite spies, hinted at in fragmented letters but never confirmed. Were these traders double agents funneling information to enemies, or is there another layer to this story we haven't uncovered? And let's not forget the odd gaps in the Babylonian king list's missing names, erased reigns, that suggest someone went to great lengths to rewrite history. Who were these vanished rulers, and what did they do to warrant such thorough censorship? The truth is, Mesopotamia's secrets aren't all in the past. Every new archaeological dig, every advanced scan of a cracked tablet, could reveal another conspiracy waiting to shock us. So while we've uncovered 25 jaw-dropping schemes today, remember the ancient world still holds countless more, hidden just beneath the surface of the clay. As we wrap up this journey through Mesopotamia's shadowy past, let's take a moment to revisit the most jaw-dropping revelations we've uncovered. From the assassination of Sargon the Great, possibly orchestrated by his own court, to the Babylonian astronomers who may have faked celestial omens to manipulate kings into war, these conspiracies reveal a world where power was often secured through deception. Who could forget the stolen treasures of Ur's ziggurat vanishing under suspicious circumstances, or the way later rulers like Naram Sin had their identities hijacked to legitimize new regimes? And let's not overlook the chilling possibility that even Hammurabi's famous law code might have been more propaganda than justice. It's no surprise that humanity has always been fascinated by hidden truths. Whether in ancient Mesopotamia or today, the allure of uncovering what those in power tried to bury speaks to something deep within us. These stories remind us that history is rarely as straightforward as it seems. Official records can be manipulated, victories rewritten, and dissent erased. But here's the real takeaway: questioning narratives, digging deeper, and staying curious are how we uncover the truth, no matter the era. So now we turn to you. Which of these 25 conspiracies shocked you the most? Was it the temple priests siphoning wealth through fake divine commands, or the mysterious deaths of lesser kings during those all-too-convenient hunting accidents? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear which ancient scheme left you speechless. And if you enjoyed unraveling these hidden histories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive into the past. After all, who knows what other secrets are still waiting to be unearthed? Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, the truth is often stranger than fiction.